Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. I've got some updates for you on two different project vehicles. First of all, the Jeep XJ Cherokee, and second of all, I've got some big news for the UglyTruck. Okay, the XJ Cherokee, that's a 98 two-door that I've been doing an LS swap in. You've probably seen this on the channel in the last couple of videos, and in the very last upload, we started the engine for the very first time. And since then, I've put a little bit more of it together. The wiring under the hood is 100% finalized. I even put the front end back together. And since then, I've also taken it for its very first test drive. It wasn't a long one. It wasn't very exciting. I just kind of drove it around the block to make sure the transmission was doing its thing and that everything kind of more or less jived together. I did notice a few leaks here and there, a few simple things I'll just tweak. And then in the very next upload, I'm going to take this thing on its maiden voyage. You guys will get to see the whole thing, what it's like to drive an LS swapped XJ. And this thing should be putting out right around 400 horsepower, and it's got 456s in it. So it might be pretty exciting. You're going to want to stay tuned for that. Next up, we have some updates on the UglyTruck. That's my 2000 Silverado, and I've built it up on this channel over the course of the last year or so. I bought it back in January of 2020 and January 2021. That's really the last time I got a chance to work on it. I finished up the turbo kit, put it on the dyno, and I've taken it to a couple events since then, and even, in fact, next week I'm taking it to a roll race event, so I will have a video on that as well. The truck is really nothing special at the moment. It's been big block swapped, like an 8.1, like I said. And then on top of that, we have an S480 turbo on the dyno at 5 pounds of boost, which is where I've been running it around on the street. It's like 400 horse and 500 pounds of torque. I did turn it up to 8 pounds of boost on the dyno, but I have actually never driven it on the street at 8 pounds because I'm so scared of the stock bottom end just letting go. But anyway, on 8 pounds, it makes 480 horse and 620 pounds of torque, if I'm not mistaken. So, UglyTruck is the topic of today's conversation, and if you guys have been a long-time viewer, you remember that I do have a goal of making 1,000 horsepower at the rear wheels with an 8.1 based big block engine. Now, guys do that all the time with the LS stuff, the 5.3s, the 6.0s. Heck, there's even 1,000 horse 4.8s running around on the streets. But I wanted to do something different, and I wanted to run a big block. Now, depending on who you ask, they'll tell you that those 8.1s will let go somewhere around the 450 to 500 horsepower mark, which I am like right next to. I've had a couple of guys send me pictures of their pistons, because the pistons are the weak link. One guy said he had a boat that was making like 425 horse and the pistons let go. Now granted, a boat does see a lot more constant duty load than say a car or truck engine does that only sees full throttle for, you know, a 30 or 45 seconds at a time maybe. But still, the pistons are definitely the weak link, and so I need to address that. A lot of you guys have said, well, why don't you just open the thing up and gap the stock rings and see how much it will hold? And that's not a bad idea. I know on an LS, for example, guys will gap the rings because under, you know, higher load and higher heat, the rings will expand and the ends will butt together, and then they'll kind of lock up in the bore, which will cause the ringland on the piston to break. So yeah, in theory, I could take my 8.1 apart, gap the rings a little bit further and put it back together and see what happens. But even if I do that, I know the stock 8.1 pistons aren't going to hold up to 1,000 horsepower. So it's like I'm doing the whole job twice for really no other reason than an experiment. Also, I just barely put this truck together, and I haven't put that many miles on it. I think I took it to one race, and I put maybe like 300 or 400 miles on it, just driving around on the streets and stuff like that. And I want to continue to enjoy it. There's a couple events I want to hit this summer, and I didn't want to take the truck apart right away just to build it a second time. But I also wanted to have an engine that's ready to go. So my solution, I'm getting a new motor. All right, so I'll get to the new motor in just a second, but first I just wanted to refresh your memory on what we're working with at the moment. This is the setup. It's a stock 8.1, and when I say stock, I mean bone stock. I haven't even touched the valve springs, the camshaft. I haven't popped the intake off to do the modification you can do there. I mean, camshaft, crankshaft, the bottom end, this is 100% stock, I guess, other than injectors, because clearly you do need larger injectors to make more power than stock. Those are 1,000 cc FIC injectors. But anyhow, As far as the actual engine goes, unopened, 100% stock. In fact, I haven't even swapped the belt from the one that I got at the junkyard. The turbo, this is a VS Racing S480. It's an 80 millimeter inducer on the compressor. It's a 132 AR T6 exhaust housing. We got a VS Racing 60 millimeter wastegate, VS Racing blow-off valve, full 4-inch exhaust with a recirculated downpipe, so it's nice and quiet. This is a pretty stealth setup. Up front, we've got a trick turbo intercooler. It enters down towards the bottom there, kind of comes up top. It's a 4-inch core, I believe. No, I'm sorry, this is the 3-inch version. I built everything on here. All the fabrication was done in-house. But yeah, the limiting factor right now is the engine, because I built everything here to support roughly 1,000 horsepower. But yeah, the engine is just not going to hold it up. So let me show you what I did pick up. So as tempting as it might be to swap this 8.1 for something that's a little more popular in terms of aftermarket parts, I really had a commitment or a determination to continue to use this 8.1 based engine and make that 1,000 horsepower goal. So stay tuned if you guys want to see this all come together, but that's my goal. I'm calling my shot. I want 1,000 horse at the wheels from a turbo 8.1. Now, kind of like I mentioned, I'm enjoying this truck and I want to continue to use it. And along with changing this engine up, my plan is to also change the transmission. So right now I'm using a junkyard 4L80, 100% stock, like it doesn't even have a shift kit in it. And the 4L80 is a great transmission. In fact, I swapped it in because I knew I would be making a lot more power someday and the 4L60 just wouldn't work well. So yeah, the 4L80 is a great transmission, but I just really enjoy shifting my own gears. So I'm like 75% sure that I'm also going to be swapping to a manual transmission at the same time as I pull this motor apart. So needless to say, I need another engine to start this build from, just because of how much time it's going to take to put the whole drivetrain together. And that way, whenever it comes time to swap this thing out, I can just pull the old motor, put the new one in, and bolt it all back together, rather than, you know, taking my motor out of the truck, taking it apart, sending it off to machine work, you know, waiting for the parts to come in and all that stuff. Because you guys know how much time it takes, you know, waiting on parts and waiting on stuff like that. So the short version is I needed a new engine to start with. So I put a feeler out on some of the Facebook 8.1 groups, which, by the way, there's a lot of great people and resources out there on Facebook in some of the 8.1 groups if you're looking for more information on this particular engine. A guy named Hank reached out to me. He lives in California. He's a very active member on some of these groups, and he builds a lot of these 8.1 based big blocks. So if you need anything, I'll try to put some of his contact info down in the description or even on the video here. Like I said, his name is Hank. Reach out to him and he can help you out with pretty much anything 8.1 related if you want to get an engine built. So he said, hey, look, I'll get you hooked up with a block. So he sent me one out. I didn't really need a full engine. I didn't need all the accessories, the pulleys, the cylinder heads, and honestly, any of the internal parts either, because I'm going to be replacing everything. So, but to do that, you obviously need to start with a bare block, and this is what he sent me. It's a 2004 model year block, I believe. No idea on the mileage or whatever, but it does still appear to have some pretty solid cross hatching on the cylinder walls. So I'm really happy with what we've got here. Does need a little bit of cleanup work, and we're going to send this off to a machine shop to have it hot tanked and cleaned up, and I'll probably do a little bit of an overbore if I have to. I'd like to stay with a stock bore simply because of the extra material that you'll have there. But once I get this back from the machine shop, then I'll order the parts that are going to fill this engine up. And to make 1,000 horsepower, you do need some strong stuff. I probably went over this twice before already, but the pistons are the weak link. The connecting rods are slightly weaker, or they're slightly stronger, but they're the next weak link. And then the stock crankshaft is said to be the strongest of the three, but still not strong enough to hold up what I want to do with it. So if you do any reading on the 8.1 stuff, you'll find that Raylar Engineering is probably the one go-to name for 8.1 parts. And so I've been talking to those guys, and I think I'm going to work with them, and that's what we're going to use to build this engine out. And there's two different options that you can go with. Number one is their 511 stroker kit. It takes it from 496 to 511 cubic inches with a stock bore, or if you do a 30 over, I believe it's like 514. And the next option up from there is a 540 stroker. And then if you do the overbore with the 540 stroker, I think it's 547. So you have two different options in terms of how many cubic inches you can make an 8.1 put out using a stock block. I'm not sure which one I'm going to go with yet. I'm kind of leaning towards the smaller option. That way I can comfortably get maybe a little bit more RPM out of it without having to worry about super exotic stuff on the bottom end. As far as the camshaft goes, I'm probably just going to go with the biggest one that they offer. Cylinder heads, they have the aluminum cylinder heads, and in terms of the intake manifold, I've got a couple ideas of what we're going to do there, whether we stick with a stock 8.1 intake and do some modifications to it, or if we mix it up with something totally different altogether. But it still is going to be turbocharged when we're done with it. In fact, I think what my plan is, I want to put the big motor in when it's built, and I might put it in naturally aspirated, build a cool exhaust for it, you know, long tube headers with an X pipe, and just to see how much power we can make NA, because I'm wondering and I'm hoping if I do like because the compression ratio on the stroker, both of them, I think will be around 10:1, which I think the stock one is 9:1 compression. So I'm wondering and hoping if I can make almost as much power with a better cylinder head, a little bit more displacement, a really hot cam, and say long tube headers and full exhaust that I did on a low boost stock motor turbo. So my benchmark is between 400 and 480 horsepower at the wheels. That's where I made between 5 and 8 pounds of boost. Like I said, 400 to 480 horsepower. And I think it'd be really cool if I could make roughly that much with a built stroked 8.1. And then, of course, then we'll put the turbo back on and then we'll go all out and we'll shoot for that 1,000 horsepower. But let's say, just for round numbers sake, this is using some generalities, but let's say I can make 500 horsepower at the tire, which I probably won't with the stock engine, but just for round numbers sake, if I made 500 horse at the wheels, naturally aspirated, if then you put 2 bar of boost or 2 atmospheres on top of that, you'll roughly double your output. No, how's that work? I think it's like, anyway, if we run about 14 pounds of boost, I think, this is probably totally wrong, but I think you can roughly double your output naturally aspirated. So 14 pounds of boost, 1,000 horsepower. Maybe we'll make it. Maybe it'll take a little more boost than that, but the great thing about a turbo setup is all you've got to do is put a little more spring in the wastegate or turn your boost controller up a little bit more, and you've got a lot more power. Now, along with the actual block itself, Hank was kind enough to send over a 2004 and up 8.1 timing cover. And the reason this is important for me is because I have a 2001 engine, and the 01 engines have a similar, the position is the same, but the spacing on the camshaft sensor is different. And you can no longer buy a 2001 to 2003 cam sensor for an 8.1, or so I've been led to believe. So he sent up a 2004 and newer timing cover, which uses the readily available camshaft sensor for the 8.1. And so that's kind of the parts that I've got to start this build from. Hopefully I can get some stuff rolling in. I'll get the block off to the machine shop here shortly. I'll show you guys all these steps along the way, and then once I get it back from the machine shop, then we'll order the crank rods and pistons and the camshaft. We'll get the bottom end done, then we'll work on the heads, and you know, it's like getting these parts one at a time to make sure it all works out with your budget, stuff like that. But I just wanted to give you guys an overview of the goal. Now, I also mentioned manual transmission, and I'm like about 75% sure I want to make this happen. I think it would be really cool to have a turbo big block manual transmission sport truck. So a couple different options, because I know it'll come up in the comments. The one that I'm probably going to go with is an NV4500 5-speed manual transmission that was used in the mid to late 90s in GM 3/4 and 1-ton trucks. They came behind big blocks. And an 8.1 is essentially, from the bell housing back, is essentially the same as a traditional big block Chevy, although you do have to use an 8.1 specific flywheel. From what I've read and researched, you can use any standard big block Chevy pressure plate, clutch disc, because the NV4500 does use that old school 10 spline input shaft. So anyhow, that's kind of what my thought process was there. A few other front runners. The next one was the ZF6 that would have come behind an 8.1 in the 2001 to 2007 2500 HD trucks. The ZF6s are a little bit more expensive. They're a lot heavier. In terms of overall strength, they might be a little bit stronger, but just kind of reading, the NV4500s, they came behind the Cummins engine, and they hold up to quite a bit of power from what you read on the internet, if you believe what's out there. So anyway, ZF6 was another option. Then I thought about an NV5600, but I'm not sure what it would take to adapt one of those. to a big block Chevy where the NV4500s already came behind the Chevy engine. I didn't want to use a car transmission like a TKO or a T56 because to get one of those to hold up to the amount of power that we're talking here, and more importantly torque and vehicle weight, it's going to be a mega dollar transmission, where you can go out and buy an NV4500 and a clutch, you know, a used transmission, a new clutch, and all that stuff for probably like, I don't know, maybe $1,500–1,600. And in theory, or I'm hoping, it'll hold up to about the amount of power that I need it to. It will be a slower shifting transmission, but it'll be a manual, and I think that'll be really cool. So a couple events coming up, and part of the reason why I'm on this manual transmission conversion thought process here is because I have a drift event that I'm actually going to probably enter the UglyTruck into. And drifting with an automatic transmission, I know it'll do it kind of, sort of, but a manual transmission will be a little bit cooler because you can kind of pop the clutch and get the back end sliding a little easier and use a hydraulic handbrake. So I think the drift event is 2 weeks from now. The roll race event, which I'm pretty sure I'm going to go to, is next Saturday, and I'll have videos and all this stuff. So stay tuned. You're not going to want to miss it. I do have to say thank you guys for watching. I appreciate it. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. We're trying to get to 100,000 subs by the end of the year. Drop a comment down below about some things you'd like to see. Maybe click the like button. The XJ Cherokee, in the very next video, we're going to get this thing out on the road, unless there's some weird major problems. But that's the plan. We're going to get this thing out on the road for like its proper first maiden voyage. We'll put some miles on it and see what it's like to drive a 400 horse V8 under the hood of a two-door, fairly lightweight XJ with 456s in it. So I think that'll be fun. You're not going to want to miss it. Catch you in a couple days, guys.